Hello, and welcome to the Downtown Decatur Smart Growth Video Tour. I am Angela Threadgill, the city's Planning and Economic Development Director, as well as your tour guide. So let's get started. Downtown Decatur wasn't as vibrant as it is today. Many years ago, 50, 60 years ago, much of the land area in downtown Decatur was covered in surface parking lots, and this is where you came to shop for cars. Lots of our businesses, our shops and restaurants, closed at the end of the business day. This is not somewhere that you would want to enjoy and linger. However, in the 1980s, the City of Decatur officials decided to start using smart growth principles. There are 7 smart growth principles that I'm going to show you how they were implemented in downtown Decatur. One of the very first smart growth principles is to foster distinctive places with a sense of place. So behind me, you will see the Pythagoras Temple, as well as another historic building. One of the key components of smart growth principles is to preserve historic buildings. You don't want to look like anywhere USA. When it comes to infill development, we also build in architectural details and standards for new construction, so that we preserve that pedestrian scale that you see in these historic buildings. One of the big questions that I always get is, what is the maximum height a building can be in downtown Decatur? That's 80 feet, or roughly 6 stories. We will never see another building that is greater than 6 stories. So we, again, want to keep a pedestrian scale, build in architectural details, including active storefronts, and restaurants, maybe even offices at the base, to create these walkable communities. And that's what we're going to talk about next, is building walkability. Right behind me is Church Street, and this is an exemplar street that shows all of the street amenities that we love for great walkability. So we have street trees to protect us from that bright Georgia sun in the summertime. We have benches, we have our city street lights, we have our trash cans and recycling bins. So this makes for great walkability. Another thing is wider sidewalks. And a not so great example is the other side of Church Street, just north of Ponce, that there is a 1-block section that doesn't show any of these examples and these great street amenities for pedestrians. But when we turn around and look north, it's pretty void of all these great features that make for great walkable places. Another walkability feature that we like to incorporate into intersections is the turning point right here. So we make this a little bit tighter so it slows cars down and it makes it safer for pedestrians at the crosswalks. So another smart growth principle is mixed land uses. And why this is so important is that we want to put closely together residential, commercial, recreational uses, and even our neighborhood schools, because then it becomes more viable to walk and bike rather than drive. We have become such an auto-dependent society that it is important to use mixed land uses to reverse this trend, to make it easier to walk to our destinations, to bike to our destinations. And what makes our downtown a lot more viable for businesses to locate here is to have residential units, whether they are apartments or condos. But believe it or not, a couple decades ago, it was so difficult to even have investors look at downtown Decatur to locate a residential building. And it wasn't until the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta that had investors take a look at downtown Decatur as a viable option. And behind me, I have the Town Center Condos. This was the very first residential project in downtown Decatur. And as you can see, the base of the building, the ground floor, is full of restaurant, retail services, personal services, and many of these businesses have been here for a long time, and you can't help but think that the residents are supporting the businesses and the businesses are providing the needs to the residents. This section of Church Street behind me used to be the location where MARTA buses would line up. This was not a great location to have restaurants. You would not want to sit outside and enjoy the streetscape. without breathing in all of the exhaust from the buses. And city officials, what they did was work with MARTA to relocate the buses over to the bus bay on Swanton Way. What has since occurred is that we have a couple of new restaurants here on the street, and it's much more enjoyable without all those buses. It should come at no surprise that traffic in Metro Atlanta is getting worse. And here in Decatur, we are trying to reverse that trend because we see it and experience it on our city streets. So transportation choices is another smart growth principle. We don't have to be so auto dependent. And so another feature here at the corner of Swanton Way and Commerce are the cycle tracks, and you are seeing these pop up around downtown Decatur as well as other parts of the city. In our Decatur connectivity plan, we have planned for 9.2 miles of separated bike lanes. And this is a great opportunity, and it makes people feel comfortable getting on a bike when they are separated from cars as well as pedestrians. So this is what we call complete streets, where everyone has a safe place to get around. And the reason we are focusing on cycle tracks is a percentage that we like to share. So there are 8% who are very confident riders and will ride in just about any sort of traffic on just about any sort of road. And then there are about 33% or 32% that, will never ride a bike. Maybe they can't ride a bike. But then there are 60% who are wanting to ride a bike, they're concerned, and they will ride a bike if there are facilities for them that we are providing here. And we have over 60 miles of streets, and we plan on putting in about 9.2 miles of cycle track. The more we build on our cycle tracks throughout our community, the more connectivity that we create between the places we live and the places we want to go. And that's one of the drivers of why we are so dependent on automobiles. It's that our homes, our jobs, our places where we want to recreate, even our schools, sometimes are miles away from where we really want to be next. And so creating these different modes of transportation, building compactly, having mixed land uses, it all works. This is all part of the smart growth principles. Another feature about walkability and making communities more walkable is having buildings and storefronts right up against the sidewalk. Behind me is one of our well-known national brands that are here right in downtown Decatur, the CVS. And if you kind of notice what happens in suburbia, a lot of these stores tend to be set back away from the street behind a surface parking lot. And it was very important, especially at this intersection, a very prominent intersection in downtown Decatur, Ponce and Commerce, to work with CVS to push it up towards the corner, to really have a presence at the corner, to really frame the streetscape and make sure to have a pedestrian entrance so that people don't feel so obligated that they have to drive and park in a large parking lot, that they feel comfortable walking to the store from any number of residences in our downtown. Architectural detailing and active ground floor is very important to creating distinctive walkable places. And behind me, this is a really good example of how a parking deck, at least on the ground floor, can be activated. And just behind that, the restaurant and then medical office, that is additional parking. But at least when you're out here on the street, on the sidewalk, you are in a very walkable environment. It's enjoyable. And then if we pan over here, just across the street, this is a not so good example. This is here at Decatur Plaza. This is the parking deck for the office building next door. And as you can see, there's very heavy columns. There's not really much activation. These are solid walls. And sometimes this can actually feel very unsafe at nighttime. It just feels like it's dark. There's not, it feels like there's some hiding places. And so this is one of the standards that we have built into our regulations, whereby whenever there is a parking deck that is being proposed, that it be fronted with commercial spaces to activate the sidewalk. Decatur loves to incorporate public art as well as work with property owners to install privately owned public open spaces. These are a great way to create a sense of place that are distinct to the city of Decatur. Behind me, you will see a public art sculpture as well as a mural. And if you take a close look around downtown Decatur, you'll notice these little features all around, and it's very unique to Decatur. Behind me is one of downtown Decatur's newest construction projects, the Hampton Inn and Suites. And why I want to show this project to you during this tour is that it features many of the architectural standards that we have for downtown infill projects. Starting with the base of the building, we require a minimum ceiling height of 14 feet. So if you think about some of our historic buildings, they will have a much higher storefront than more recent buildings. So we want to pick up on some of those architectural features of the historic buildings in our downtown. The next feature is a lot of transparency. There's a lot of windows at the base of the building, but also as you move up the building, there's not a whole lot of blank wall space. The third feature that we like to point out is the horizontal banding of the building. As you can see, the building is 6 stories. That is the maximum height that a building can be in our commercial districts. 80 feet is the maximum, which is roughly 6 stories. But that horizontal banding creates a more pedestrian scale. It is a perception that the height is slightly lower. Some of the other architectural details is a band across the top of the building. Again, trying to bring and define what the top of the building is. Additional features that are required by our regulations is, especially for hotels, that registration drive-up is located on the side of the building, as well as their parking deck. There's plenty of parking for all of the visitors that come here to Decatur, but the parking deck is hidden behind the hotel. Another smart growth principle is to make sure that we have predictive, fair, cost-effective approaches to development. And it is so important to get the buy-in of the private sector. The private sector is the ones with the money to make all of this happen. We cannot solely rely on the public sector and the tax dollars to get this done. The way Decatur makes a predictive and fair process is through the regulations of the Unified Development Ordinance, or what we shorten to UDO. Within the Unified Development Ordinance, we set up the expectations, and that's where our rules and regulations for land uses, the typical zoning codes, the stormwater management, tree protection, parking standards, all of the architectural standards, as well as building and fire codes, all of those are wrapped up in the Unified Development Ordinance. A developer and the development project needs to meet all of those regulations, and it either meets the regulations or it doesn't. Which brings me to the final smart growth principle, which is to engage the community in development decisions. So when a development project does not meet the regulations, it goes to a public hearing. And so whether it's a variance that goes to the Zoning Board of Appeals, or maybe a conditional use permit that goes to the Planning Commission and then to the City Commission for final decision, those are public meetings, and we encourage all of those interested parties to come to the public meeting to voice their comments and concerns before a decision is rendered. But even backing up before these development projects come before us, let's talk a little bit about where these public policies come from. So the city undertakes a lot of master plans. It undertakes a strategic plan, which we are currently underway right now, the strategic plan update. And these public policies are born out of these major public input opportunities. And so if you have not been engaged in the strategic plan update, which is our plan for the next 10 years, please come out and join us in the strategic plan, because this is where we are going to set public policy that eventually will inform how development projects are regulated and how they are approved. And so we really need that input before we start developing new public policy. And that concludes our Smart Growth video tour of downtown Decatur. I am Angela Threadgill, Planning and Economic Development Director. I hope you learned a lot about smart growth principles and how we have implemented them throughout the downtown Decatur. And maybe you're starting to see some of these ideas and principles pop up in your own neighborhoods. I hope to see you again soon and in person.